my name is Sofia Echeverria Keck, and we are in San Francisco at the Small Business Development Center, and I'm very happy to have Grace Tiscareño Sato, author of Latinovating, Green American Jobs, and the Latinos Created Them. Hi, Grace, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you so much for being here. I read your book, and I think it's fantastic. I've never seen a book like this, so I was very intrigued to know more about it. And hopefully this short video interview will let the viewers know what is all the book about. So tell me, what is the book about and what inspired you to write it?
Well, first of all, thank you for your interest, because I poured 2 years of my life into this work, and I appreciate any feedback, so thank you for that. So what is this book about? 2 years ago, I had an opportunity to write an article for a magazine, for NSHMBA, National Society of Hispanic MBAs. And that was based on a curiosity. When the editor called, I said, I'm really wondering, because I'm working in Europe for a company that's really deep into sustainability, what is the Latino business community doing vis-a-vis the green economy? So it really started with a curiosity that I had and a chance to write an article. That was the start. What happened is, within a very short time of starting to find people, I found almost 3 dozen Latinos who are running green businesses in a lot of different industries. And so that made me go, maybe there's much more than an article here, because I started hearing some themes. So that was the inspiration. Now, what's in the book is 10 case studies of Latinas and Latinos, the 50-50 mix of men and women, who all decided that they could do better in their industries. And I tell stories of childhood to innovation, how they decided to do it, what they studied, and really to show different career paths that are possible in this new economy. My mission with this book, Sophia, there's actually 2 missions. The first mission is, I really believe that our young people, our Latinos, need to see case studies from childhood that they can relate to, all the way through higher ed and beyond, so that they can aspire to be like the people that I profiled. Very, very important first mission. The second mission is, mainstream America is not filled with positive media images of Latinos. Very much the opposite. So my mission is to show mainstream America the economic contributions, the innovation, the intelligence, the creativity of Latinos like those in this book. So really, those are the 2 missions.
So, I'm happy that you touched the mainstream America, because I actually had a question about that. In your introduction, you wrote, and I quote, "America only sees images of Latinos in stories about poverty, deportation, violence at the border, and undocumented nannies. The stereotypes reinforced by CNN. Americans have no idea how deeply the Latino community cares about environmental issues." So when you refer to Americans, when you talk about mainstream America, who are you talking about?
I'm talking about everybody that's out there, all races, creeds, colors, nationalities, everybody. And what I mean by that is, what are they seeing? Okay, so pick up a newspaper, go through there, and go ahead and circle how many positive stories about Latinos you're going to see. I dare anybody to try this. That's what I mean. So it's the images that are being put out there to everybody in this nation are not of positive images of Latinos.
Would
That's
you
what I'm
say
talking about.
everybody but Latinos, or even Latino Americans themselves put out images that maybe, reinforce certain stereotypes of our own culture?
I think it's a little bit of both, but let me tell you what really did it for me. There's a professor at Texas State University who presented at the inaugural Silicon Valley Latino Leadership Summit that we had. And he presented data where he's a communications professor. They studied thousands of hours of airtime media, TV, newspaper, magazines, just mainstream stuff that's out there. And they found that less than 2% of all stories were about Latinos. Of that 2%, then it's okay, what are the stories? 85% of the stories were about deportation and immigration and drug crimes and all these negative things. Very, very few stories about positive things, like people in the book, ever make it into the mainstream media that America as a nation consumes. That is why the stereotypes persist. That's what I'm talking about. So my mission is like less deportation stories, and I showed this on a slide, less deportation stories, and we hear the word Latino, and more innovation stories.
You really touch home when I read the following paragraph in your book that says, "Why are Latinos intricately involved in the move towards sustainable practices?" you answer your own question saying, I believe we are honoring long-standing and deeply embedded cultural values of conservation, preservation of natural resources, and creative reuse. When I read it, I relate to it. But can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, maybe an example would help. So when I speak at universities and colleges, which I do very regularly, I ask, how many of you have ever were told as a child, no lo tires, lo podemos usar otra vez? So it's just this fundamental belief that don't get rid of it, we can find another use for it, whatever it may be. An example is Humberto Rincon, who's one of the engineers in the book, who's innovating now in the industrial lighting world. He's innovating industrial lighting, really big lights that hang in retail spaces and warehouses. And his philosophy is to reuse as much of the existing lighting as possible while you're networking and really redoing the chemistry in the lights. Why? Why does he care to reuse the existing structure of the light? Because he was the 9th kid of 9 in a migrant camp in Imperial Valley. And they just didn't throw things away. Mm-hmm. So he tells stories of learning to innovate with bottle caps and string from the bolsa de harina and making little trucks out of whatever and badges of bottle caps. So he tells these stories of innovating with whatever was around. So that became his underlying belief as a kid to not throw things away. And then now as an engineer, he can apply that philosophy that he learned from his family and his culture into just being much more efficient with this revolution in this particular industry. So that's what I mean by that, about we learned how to preserve and conserve and reuse. And I know I have stories like that in my childhood as well. Take a sock, put it on Barbie, decorate it with a couple of beads, and she has a fabulous dress. Right? So these kind of creative things, and that's what I really mean by that. If you take that underlying philosophy, if we recognize that we have that foundation, then all we need is the desire to innovate and make an industry better. And that's what these examples show.
So talking about the examples, these 10 stories, one of the parts that I really liked about the book was that at the end of each interview, you would say, so-and-so recommends.
Yes.
For me, that was invaluable because it's almost like asking them, well, what should I do? And them telling you. There's a lot of resources in each interview.
Right.
Overall, I'm wondering, what are your personal recommendations when it comes to, green jobs being created by Latinos, or in general, what are your recommendations about it?
Great question. So, yes, because I know that all 10 of those people, plus me, will never actually get a chance to mentor all the millions of kids that need to see these stories, I wanted to design it exactly like you just said. If you were to sit down with Rosa Maria Caballero and ask her, how do I become an eco-consultant? How do I create my own business like you have? She would tell you, read these blogs.
Right.
Right? So that's why I did it that way. My favorites out of all those resources are these. Read Scientific American, because these innovations do not happen without at least a very strong basic understanding of scientific principles. If we're going to solve our water problems, the energy problems, we need people who understand science. You don't have to be a scientist per se, like Frank Ramirez, he has an econ degree, but he understood the science, and that's what launched his company. So Scientific American, and get really, really smart on renewable energy. And by that I mean understand the grid. We call it the smart grid. There's a reason we call the new grid the smart grid, because the status quo is not. So understanding the smart grid, just Googling those words and starting to really get into the energy sector is something everybody can do. And then that'll spark more ideas about storage, distribution, generation, because that is a really huge problem that we need to solve, and we need more brains innovating in that space. Mm-hmm. So I would say, stay on top of science, get curious about the science, get curious about the energy grid, and really that's how you start. And understand these 10 people have 19 college degrees.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, from AAs to PhDs. So that education is very, very important in order to be able to execute on your ideas. So part of it is having the idea and the foundation to do better for the planet and do the green business and create and do better. The second half is to actually have the skills and the network to actually execute that.